Hi, my name is R.D. Whitney. I'm the CEO of 365 Media, and I'm going to talk a little bit about building engaged 365 communities, which is what we help clients do here at 365 Media. A little background about myself, and then about 365 Media. Then we're going to talk about 4 specific examples of communities that I've helped conceive and launch, because maybe it will spark some ideas as you're thinking about your communities or ways to grow your community. I also want to then go from those 4 examples, talk about how marketing is evolving very quickly and what that has to do with community. I want to talk about the community of communities that we've stood up and what we're doing with that, and then just how to get started if you're considering building community, and a couple other ideas just to maybe get you thinking if you're already involved in communities. So my background, for over 30 years, I've been involved in building communities. It just has been called something different. I started back in the specialized publishing area with companies like Wolters Kluwer and Thomson and International Data Group. But the epiphany in my career came when I was just 25 years old. I was commuting a pretty long distance every day into Boston in some terrible traffic. And this small little publishing company right in the backyard where I was raising my daughters in New Hampshire was acquired. And it was a 10-year-old publishing company that was in the management consulting and executive recruiting spaces. But the online had not really come about yet. So we weren't yet in the area of online publishing type assets yet. This company had traditional directories, print directories, and newsletters in 2 professions, management consulting and executive recruiting. So these 2 very smart brothers came and bought it and had an idea that they were going to transform the business so that it wasn't a business based off of the format that it was. It wasn't a directory company or it wasn't a newsletter company, that it was going to become, what we call it today is a community that would serve the members and help interact between the buyers and sellers, help connect buyers and sellers through the education that would be created in these communities. And boy, did they do that. I took whatever job I could get. I could be home for dinner to see my daughters and also be part of this exciting transformation of a 10-year publishing company that was going to be transforming into a community. So I quickly became general manager, and the business just flourished. It went from $1 million to $48 million in just 48 months. It absolutely transformed. And how did it do that? Let me give you an example. So back then, you might remember that classified advertising used to be in this little thing we called the newspaper. It would put ink on our hands and we would look for a job in the newspaper. Well, that was transforming to this new online world of Monster.com at the time and Hot Jobs and Career Builder. And there was lots of transformation happening there because it was so much more efficient. So we had never done an event before. So we went out and rented the Jacob Javits Center in New York and launched the first e-recruiting conference, which was a multi-million-dollar event, took off really quickly and really seized in on that opportunity and helped us create all types of businesses around that community that was evolving in the talent management and recruiting space. We were trying all other formats as well. Before it was really even such a significant format that was kind of brought on later by Gartner Group and others, we were doing peer networking type models where executives or professionals which were non-competing would come together, and we did it as a subscription model, and they would learn from each other, because that's going to be the best way to learn from mistakes and also successes so that you can be more successful in your job. We were doing every format that you can think of around these 2 communities of recruiting and in management consulting. So this was just such a great learning ground for me as I thought about communities, and it's what I've been doing ever since. Also like to say when I'm doing interviews about community, those original sort of publishing models that are suddenly all back in vogue again, those were the original SaaS businesses. They were recurring revenue streams, they were in the formats that were very challenged, like magazines and subscription newsletters and directories and all those. But they really laid the foundation for the community models that exist today. So I've been doing this ever since. I've worked for some of the biggest event companies in the world, helping them look at where they might have a thriving event, but thinking of ways to build on that further. And I'm going to talk about a couple specific communities that I've built, which I've used the term institute as I've built them, but we found a home for these niche professional areas that didn't have one, and the institutes really thrived. So just a few testimonials there, my background. So 365 Media, just a little background about that. 365 Media has actually been around for a little over 20 years. It started in the event technology area and also acted as a media services company to many of the biggest publishing and event companies around the world. The reason I got to know it is because they were always my secret weapon. When I would work for lots of these big organizations, building community, I would bring 365 Media in, and they would always help me be successful. So that's how I got to know the owner really well. So I, after working 30 years for others, went out on my own in 2020. What a year to go out. But I had just founded the Virtual Events Institute with 3 other co-founders, which turned out to be a real great success and need. And another example of a community, which I want to just talk about a little bit about that as well. But I went out on my own and partnered with the founder of 365 Media, and we're 50-50 owners. And this area down in yellow here, this is what we help companies do. We help companies build community formats, including conferences, trade shows, online learning, online training, virtual events, industry award programs, SaaS businesses, research, databases, validation formats, publishing, peer learning, online marketplaces, certification program, and sponsored membership businesses. So, I always think of a community as being as standing up from these pillars. And I think of these formats that I just mentioned that 365 Media helps clients with as those pillars: the conferences, trade shows, online training, virtual events, research, database validation, publishing, peer learning, all these formats that I mentioned. I literally think of them as pillars holding up the roof of the community. And I like to think about it in relation to Old Faithful out in Yellowstone. So just a quick story there. My daughters were maybe 6 and 8 years old, and I had the chance to take them out to Yellowstone. And we had a family vacation out there, and we got to see this. We got to see Old Faithful. And I learned that this happens because 3 things come together at the exact same time: heat, water, and plumbing. There's plumbing there because of the caldera, and there's heat there because of the thermal, and there's water there. And that's what causes this constant reaction of Old Faithful. So I think of that in relation to these pillars that build community. So you could have one pillar, you could have just an event, which you could call a community. But if you have several of them, and several of them coming together and working together, you can get this kind of reaction, this Old Faithful, this constant, predictable reaction of a thriving community. So I like to think of it in terms of that. Now I'm going to talk about those examples that I mentioned of communities that I've helped build or conceive or manage or run. This first one, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I was able to get my hands on the publishing assets that served accounts payable professionals and accounts receivable professionals. It was a newsletter that was in bankruptcy, actually, because people were starting to subscribe to these print products. But there was a subscriber base of people that needed information. And then there was obviously a vendor base there that was changing a lot because of fintech. So we took that newsletter and that content, and we built a membership. And we call this the Institute of Finance and Management, IOFM. membership.com, which you can see today. So we created a membership and we put tools and resources behind the paywall. We thought that would be helpful to the professionals because there really was no place where they could go get those types of things. And a lot of times you could pull really interesting tools out of content that had already been created. So we created this really interesting community, this membership, which we charged for, and professionals were happy to pay for it because it helped them save time, kept them in compliance, helped them be more successful in their career. And then we started doing, of course, live events. So we started doing events in Vegas and Disney World, and they just really took off and the community strengthened, much like sort of that old faithful analogy I showed you. So we had a few pillars there. And we also added in there a certification program because there really was no training for this niche profession. You don't learn about the details of accounts payable, accounts receivable in college, even in an accounting degree. You typically learn it on the job, but there was no peer sharing and learning, which was a shame. So we gave this profession a home, the Institute of Finance and Management. And in just 24 months from that bankrupt newsletter, we were able to build this up so that it was acquired by Diversified Communications. And now it's a thriving business at Diversified. And I got to go with it for 4 years. Diversified has lots of shows and events. And I was able to sort of introduce this model to them that if you have an event, that you can add a membership or a certification or perhaps lead generation business, or maybe an online directory or some other format, these pillars that I was talking about. You can add that to your community and it doesn't cannibalize the live show at all. In fact, it really enhances it. And this is obviously a very timely discussion now, having just, coming out on the other end of the pandemic and having this stop on live shows and us all having to pivot to virtual, what the future looks like. And a lot of people are predicting sort of these 365 engaged communities. That's why we love our name. Let me give you another example as well. When I was at Diversified, I was able to inherit some other shows in my portfolio, and I had a show that was for administrative professionals. And I urged the team that we develop a certification program because there were 2 million of these administrative professionals in America. This was a show of about 2,000 of them coming together to learn and be inspired once a year. But there was really no sort of formalized education program that they could learn from each other or any type of network. There was an association created around this event to help with lead generation for the event, which started that sharing. And then we added in the education program, a certification program called PACE. PACE took off rapidly, became a significant revenue product, profitable rapidly. And that show grew significantly in future years. And I really think, again, it goes back to that sort of pillar model or that old faithful analogy where if you have several of these working together, they help each other and they help each of the pillars help the community grow and prosper. So it became more of an attraction for more prospects, a better membership value for everyone involved in this community, and all the assets within them grew both in revenue and profit significantly. I'll give you another example. 3-4 years ago, I was able to become the CEO of something called the Validation Institute. Really neat business. There was a spin out from GE and Intel. They were creating a healthcare point solution that would help the self-insured employer understand better the details of their at-risk health employees so that they could intervene earlier and help ultimately reduce their insurance costs and help the employees be more healthy. So they were making a marketing claim, this GE and Intel collaboration. And the person that was running that was surprised that he could pretty much say anything he wanted. It was the Wild West. There was no one validating those marketing claims. And yet they had a competitor that was making marketing claims that were mathematically impossible. So, aha. there really should be a third-party group out there that validates these marketing claims for the buyer. This is particularly interesting if you are listening to this and you run an event with vendors, or you have a community with vendors, or you're thinking about a community with vendors, because I would argue that there's nobody better placed to help do that service for the buy side and validate those marketing claims than you. So that's what this institute did, the Validation Institute, and I was able to take this on as CEO. And what I realized pretty quickly was that there was no education for the buy side, that these self-insured employers were getting all their education from the same organizations that made more money when their rates went up and their services went down. So we just had this thought of, what if we could educate them to be better buyers? And we had the validated sellers and put them together. So that was the concept behind Validation Institute. So we created an online learning program, and that's something we do at 365 Media. We help organizations do these types of things. It was 10 modules of online learning, much like the other examples I showed you in the administrative professionals and in the IOFM example. These were online training programs, very profitable, pretty quick and inexpensive to launch if you can find the right subject matter experts and have content to leverage or can develop that. And this program was quickly accepted by SHRM, as you can see here in the slide, and really helped educate a lot of the buyers. So really interesting, different community here with different pillars. And we talk about sort of the buyers and sellers and the ecosystems that might be around a community. These are two ecosystems that I visually created around. One on the left is in the accounting space, all the accounting technologies that are really kind of mind-boggling to think about, all the different areas. On the right, it was in the med tech space for another trade show or conference that we were building. But think about, if you're considering a community, what would your ecosystem look like? What would the buyers be? What would the categories be like if they were considering trying to make a purchase of services or solutions in their industry? Maybe you could create this type of graphic to get started. Just a neat technique and idea. So my last example, it's actually launched about 10 months ago in the middle of the pandemic. And I think it's a great example of how fast a community can launch and how important it can be to serve its constituents. So just a little quick background. One of my roles, I was working for, at that time, a publicly traded company called Tarsus Group. I was helping to head up their online media businesses, and I was CEO of something that they owned called TSNN, the Trade Show News Network. And we reported on everything that was happening sort of in the conference and trade show space. At that time, virtual events were kind of new. So you can see the date here, 2010, we were reporting on virtual events. We had done a study on that. And, the finding isn't too much different than we're finding out now, is that these virtual events, they don't replace live events. They never will, but they can help build out a more 365 engaged community that they can help enhance that event. But anyway, this was 10 years too early. I stayed with virtual events, got very involved with them. I was on the board of a publicly traded company called OnStream Media that invented webcasting and had a virtual event technology. So I've done lots of them and been involved in them. So when the pandemic hit, I was asked to be on a webinar series, and I was asked to talk about the monetization of virtual events. And I talked about some of the examples that I just shared with you about this idea that don't think of it as just a one-off or a see you next year mentality. Instead, think of it as a 365 community. Think of it as an always-on community of peers sharing best practices. And inside there are these pillars. So 15,000 people from around the world came on this webinar. It was just incredible. There was so much need for learning about how to engage members and audiences online, particularly around virtual events at that time, as you can imagine. So we parlayed that, me and 3 other co-founders, and launched the Virtual Events Institute, which has been a real success. It trains now in former markets and Hyatt hotels and corporations all around the world. Very proud to have been a co-founder of this, and I serve on the board. But in relation to this presentation, this is yet another community. This one started with online learning. The second thing they created was an awards program. Award programs are wonderful because you can bring in awards to get sort of an idea of best practices out there. And then that can create some great resources later to create a membership, as we talked about in the IOFM example. Maybe have tools, resources, best practices, benchmarks behind a paywall for your members. So the Virtual Events Institute is a very exciting launch and community, and just another example. But so that's what I've been involved in throughout my career. Some examples there. But what's really going on here, and why am I so excited about community? Marketing is evolving again. Sort of the Mad Men Don Draper days of advertising agencies on Madison Avenue. That changed to sort of a one-to-one or direct marketing mindset next, and then a one-to-one marketing mindset. And then, as the internet came on and social media became prevalent, we started really getting involved with social media marketing. And then, that transition to, it's not just about just anything online, it's about good quality content and using that as gravity. So we got to more of a, creating a content marketing strategy. But I will argue, and I think you're probably seeing this with all the energy around community, is that marketing is evolving again. Companies, media companies, corporations, product companies, nonprofits, association, they don't want to just disrupt their prospects and customers. They want to create a community of them and be constantly giving them value, so that when there is something that they're trying to create a commerce transaction, that it's not a disruption, that they feel part of that. And you see, some of these communities, certainly in the software side with Salesforce and QuickBooks as an amazing community example as well. But you see lots of software companies that have made communities out of their user groups, particularly in the gaming space. But you see it in every industry. You see it in pharma, you see it in medical, you see it in associations, you see it in the media companies, companies that did exist by just running events, now are really interested in building these communities of the members and providing resources and benefits all year long. So that's what's happening here. And recently, just earlier this year, TechCrunch came out with a headline that the Chief Community Officer is the new CMO, which I think is super interesting and telling about what's happening here. And they had this quote that community isn't a single Slack group or an event or a newsletter, or any of those pillars that I mentioned earlier in this presentation, but it's an aggregation of all these touch points. And it includes both customers, eventual customers, one-time users, and I would also argue, vendors and consultants, and then anybody involved in that particular concentrated area of interest. And then here in bold, I just put, in my words, a community is a home. It's a place of belonging, and I believe it's the future of marketing. So 365 Media helps organizations move towards these community models. We help companies build these pillars of community, be it creating an online training program that might develop into a certification program, or we might help them develop a strategy for online events or physical events, or the integration of other pillars into their current media assets. So lots of ways to do that. But what I realized as we were growing, as I became CEO of the company and we were growing it, is that there's a lot of organizations that need sort of basic information around building communities. And my whole kind of 30 years of experience came to me and said, I've been building these communities in all these professional areas, but there is literally a professional area in development right here called community. So in February, we created a community for community leaders. And if you're a Seinfeld fan, you might remember Kramer had the idea of a coffee table book on coffee tables, about coffee tables. So I think it's, kind of a funny way to think about it. But we thought, well, what if we loaded it up with tools and resources and templates and things that would be helpful to the community leaders? And we invited people in. And as of today, there's over 630 people in this community just since February. So it's really expanded, and you can click there if you would like to join and take advantage. It's all free. We are evolving this into the Community Leaders Institute, very consistent with what I've done in the past. And we are going to be building that out and creating all types of training programs for anyone involved in community, helping them understand the changing technology landscape, and having events around the country and around the world. Great thing to jump into if you're interested in community. Again, OC Online Community 365 is free. Soon, the Community Leaders Institute, which will be the evolution of that, will be free to be a member, and there'll be lots of resources in there and peers for you to learn from their successes and avoid their mistakes and be more successful because of that. So I'm really excited about that. So I hope this short presentation was helpful for you just to kind of get your ideas thinking about communities, the monetization of communities for sustainability, or leveraging communities for your product or your nonprofit or your organization. There's lots of ways to tackle this. That's what my organization does. And if you ever want to talk about any of those, my contact information is here. But maybe think to yourself, within your content or media assets or your lists or your maybe an event you've run before or even a webinar you've run where you see an area of interest, is there any specialized education that could be packaged up into an online training and maybe even a niche certification program? Are there tools, research, peer-to-peer best practices, benchmarks, or a need to connect that you could form that community out of? Are there any ways to create reoccurring revenue, which is sort of the best for sustainability? I just give an example here. I wrote down rig data. About 12 years ago, I sat at lunch and met a guy who had just bought a bankrupt company, which was a directory of all the components on oil rigs in the ocean. And so that was an important directory, but it always changed. By the time I printed it, it changed. And he had turned it into an electronic resource, of course, and put it behind a paywall. And so you could subscribe to it and constantly be kept up to date. And he had told me, I saw him maybe 4 or 5 years after that. I think it was over a $10 million asset. He had mentioned it really grown. So what I'm getting at is there information or data assets or things that you could bring together for your community that could turn into a very lucrative model for sustainability of the community? And that's what I mean. Or a SaaS model. Can you find a productive way into your community members' workflow in a way that you can create a membership and put tools and resources that become essential to them in that workflow? So like sort of the IOFM example I mentioned in accounts payable and accounts receivable. If you're in those professions, you're going to want to be a member because that includes tools and resources that are going to help you do your job better. And the cost of membership is just a no-brainer. Are there any subscription data or intelligence opportunities? And I'm going to use the example of StoreTrack, which is owned by my partner at 365 Media. He noticed, all these storage units going up all around the country. And maybe some people, that are listening in on this have seen those. Of course, we fill our garage and then we have so much in our garage that we have to rent a storage area to put more stuff in. But anyway, if you own one of these storage businesses, how do you know what to charge for that? When the garage comes open or that locker space comes open, how do you know how much to charge for that? You don't want to charge too little, you don't want to charge too much, or you won't get the customer. So the interesting thing is that each of these businesses usually listed their pricing on their website, but there was no way to kind of know that or in any kind of aggregated way. So my partner noticed that and he was able to, through technology, kind of bring that all together and created a subscription product. So if you own or run one of these businesses, it pulls in all the pricing information all around you, so you know exactly what is best optimal price, so that you can keep those rented and not charge too much or too little. Really a nice efficiency tool for your business, an intelligence tool. So think about in your possible community or the community you are running now, are there any of these data or intelligence tools that you could build? These are not expensive to launch. We could talk through them if you'd ever like to, but it's really about thinking about them, planning, and then thinking about what the essential benefits are to the members. And develop these types of products online or in a online and face-to-face type in-person environment. These formats can really work together well and can be inexpensive and low risk to start. I like this idea of a minimally viable product. So you really kind of think through what are the benefits that people would want in some of these community pillars and launch it. And people vote with their wallet. If they subscribe to it or they purchase it or they don't for whatever reason, you can evolve it quickly. But you can also avoid big costly mistakes of going and spending lots of money and launching something perfect, because sometimes perfect can be the enemy of really pretty darn good. So you can launch these models quickly and in low risk way. So those were some ideas I just wanted to present to you today, just to kind of give you some food for thought, maybe get you thinking about your community. Again, if I could ever be helpful, you have my contact information. rd@365media.com is a pretty simple way to get me, and I'm on LinkedIn at RD Whitney. And good luck with you and your community. And if I can ever be helpful, please give me a shout. Have a great day.